First on the agenda today is the National Sheep and Goat Producers Needs Assessment results, and that will be presented by Dr. Kelly Froelich and Jalen Quintana. So I'll let you guys take over.
Okay, well, I'll get started here. Oh, is it not moving? There it goes. So just wanted to kind of start off a little bit with a background on this needs assessment and kind of how it came about. So Jalen and I both started at SDSU last year, kind of during the pandemic, and we were really struggling with what we could do with extension programming, during COVID with all the restrictions and stuff. And so as a good place to start, we thought about doing a needs assessment. And Heidi Carroll, who's also on the Zoom call, has been an instrumental part in helping us develop this. And as we were kind of building this needs assessment, we had reached out to our other colleagues, across the United States, if they could give us some feedback on this needs assessment. And we quickly realized that there was a need, I guess, or a want to kind of know this information across the US. So it kind of went from just being a South Dakota needs-based assessment to more of a nationwide assessment. And the goal behind it was to really understand collective producer strengths and struggles, but then also help us, determine what is the best way to put our foot forward as extension professionals to help those producers. So the needs assessment was really kind of split into 3 sections. So the first section kind of talking about what are producers' preferences on production and like management topics of importance and challenges that they have. And then also just trying to determine and gauge, producers' preference and on how we deliver extension programming, and what's the best way to reach our producers. And then lastly, just to kind of determine, who are our producers, just collecting some of that demographic information. So for this survey, it was mostly online based. We had all the questions formatted in an online survey tool called Question Pro. And when we, advertised it, we did mention that if people would like a hard copy, that was available, but we didn't get too many requests for hard copies to be mailed out. But like I said, we reached out to other university, small ruminant specialists to kind of peer review this and developing this, and before the initiation of, the survey to the public, it was reviewed by 15 university small ruminant specialists. And the questions on the survey was a mix of open and close-ended questions. And this was just to kind of, we really wanted to get, or, have the best way of, just seeing what producers, preferences are, what their challenges are. And we thought, kind of a mixed format of questions would be the best way of doing that. And then, of course, for the university side of things, this was an institutional research board exempt, basically meaning that, we're not doing anything, unethical in conducting the survey. So when we talk about this survey, the number of responses that we got was a really small sliver if you look at, the number of sheep or goat farm or ranches in the US. So I have the numbers listed from the last USDA 2017, census. And so I'll show it to you on the next slide, the number of responses that we got, but we had it open for roughly about 7 months. And I guess we feel that our responses were really good, just knowing how surveys work, that, it's tough to get, a lot of people to respond to it, but we felt like it had, a good response rate for the number of people. So the total number of responses that we got were 672 from 47 different states. And we haven't quite finished analyzing all of our data yet. So today is kind of more an overall summary, and then Jalen will also talk a little bit of some of the data that we got from just the Western section. But our plans in kind of analyzing this data and publishing it is that we can kind of separate out the response rates into different regions. And so we have 4 different regions that we're going to kind of separate it out into. So West region, highlighted in kind of the green, North Central, highlighted in the red, East as the blue, and orange as South Central. And these regions were determined based off of a survey or that the American sheep industry did on kind of like ewe productivity numbers, and the cost of production. So if that looks familiar, that's, how we separated out those regions. And then we did have one, I guess, a 5th group that we called unknown, just because we had respondents who didn't say where they were from. So they just kind of came categorized in unknown. And I will, point out that we did have some international responses, but they were all pulled out of the survey. We had a few from Canada and a few from other random places in the world. But this is just focused on responses that we got in the United States. So one of the very first questions that we asked on this survey was, how important are each of the following topics to you? So we came up with kind of a list of different topics that between Heidi, Jalen, and I felt that was really important for the sheep and goat industry. And the respondents, were allowed to rank them from very important to not important at all for all the different topics. And from the topics that we had listed, respondents that listed topics that were very important. The first one came out, parasite management. 65% of respondents said that was very important. And second came breeding stock nutrition, and third in reproduction management. And then tied for kind of that 4th, 5th, and 6th spot, in no particular order, I guess, was lamb and kid nutrition, newborn and maternity health, and general animal health practices. So it's kind of a follow-up question to that initial, topics are important to you. We asked producers to share, any additional topics or specific issues that we hadn't listed that were, they felt was important enough to share to us. And this is kind of really preliminary on how we're analyzing this, but as a start, we kind of just put things in categories and counted the number of mentions of things. So one thing that came up had the most mentions that we didn't have like a really broad overall theme was market and marketing. And in second and third, we had veterinary care, medicines, diseases, and facilities. So that was really interesting to see from that. Further down in the survey, we also asked a question, and this became really interesting. What are your top 3 challenges as a producer? As just kind of another way to gauge, what are the things that producers really are struggling with? And it was interesting to see, kind of the common themes between that, what is important to you and what are your challenges, because we saw, as you can see, similar, themes. The first one or mention was, markets and marketing. Again, parasites, which was number 1 in, most important topic, was also a really strong, top 3 challenge for producers. So, and then from kind of going from those questions, what are important and what are challenges to our producers, is to kind of just gauge, who are our producers? So one of the questions we asked, do you raise sheep, goats, or do you have both? And what we found is from the respondents that we got, majority of them, 46%, raise sheep, 35% raise goats, and 19% of them, raise both sheep and goats. And then following that question kind of, can you describe your operations income to your household income? So how much does your sheep or goat herd or flock, contribute to your total family, living expenses or household income? So we had this kind of broken down into 4 different categories. So whole family income, if they're a single spouse, if that's their main income, or if it was just supplemental income, or, obviously I prefer not to respond. And what we found is that 70% of the responses that we got say that their sheep or goat or both only contributes as supplemental income to their household. Then kind of, determining what is the average flock or herd size annually. And we found that 71% of the respondents had a flock or herd size of 99 or less. So if you look back at like the USDA census report, this wasn't, I guess, too surprising to us, just because we know that there are an increased number of new and beginning producers. But it was a question that we really wanted to ask because it helps us when we're kind of coming up with extension programming. I know we've talked about doing some beginning producer stuff, and it really helps us having a number that we can put into a grant and being like, hey, we have a lot of small flock herd sizes, and this pairs along really well with the number of years of experience that we have for producers. Then the other question that we asked is, which of the following best describes your operation? So this was kind of a select all question. So if somebody stated that their flock or herd was registered, they could mark that, but they could also, mark that their flock or herd was, farm flock or range flock. So this wasn't, just a one check or done. But as you can see that most of our producers, categorize themselves as a farm flock herd, or 38% of them, followed by 32% said that they're also a registered flock or herd, and very small percentage of ours says that they're a feedlot or a buy finish kind of operation. So with that, I'll switch it over to Jalen.
Thanks, Kelly. So as Kelly was kind of alluding to with the flock sizes, we did ask how many years of experience you have. There's been a huge push, I think, in all of our states to really start doing programming for beginning producers. And so this really displayed for us the fact that maybe that is something we really should be looking into, because almost half of our respondents had less than 10 years of experience, with over a quarter of those being 0 to 5 years. And so that gives us a really good foundation, like Kelly said, when we're grant writing an extension or just developing programming, keeping in mind that half of our producers that could be in our programs are just starting out in the industry. But I think it also gives us a good reminder that there's still a good half of the industry that we can really heavily rely on. There's 16% that have 30 plus years of experience. And so as we start to build programs seeking a combination of both those experienced producers as well as those beginning producers, should be, I guess, in the back of our minds. You can switch it, Kelly. So yeah, as I was saying, less than 10 years. So then looking at how economically important the following products are to your operation. Again, this was on one of those Likert scales. So these were each of our categories: fiber and wool, meat, dairy, your non-food products, just the marketing of live animals, and then if they're providing any sort of grazing services, or if there's another category that they consider economically important. So they could rank those either very important or not applicable. And so when we look at the average of those, Keep in mind here that one or the lower numbers are closer to that very important as opposed to a higher number being closer to the not applicable or not at all important. And so when we look at that overall consensus, I think if you advance, Kelly, yep. The number one importance economically for our producers are those live animals. So those are going to be animals either being sold off the farm or through sale barns and things like that. And then the second most important was meat production. We also asked the typical, kind of extension demographic questions. Again, really interesting to see that the majority of our producers are in that 30 to 59 years of age range. And then on the gender side of things, 63% of the respondents in this survey were female and 33% were male. So then we kind of figured a lot of the viewers on this webinar series are based out of this Western region, especially with some of these industry updates coming after us. So we wanted to highlight just what we found within the Western region. And these will just be bits and pieces of some of the things that we talked about before. So the top 5 very important topics in the Western region, number 1 was breeding stock nutrition, followed by reproductive management, general animal health, newborn maternity and husbandry, and genetics. So it was slightly different from what we saw from the overall, where that parasite management didn't necessarily fall into the top 5 like we would have, or like we saw, I guess, in the overall results, but still really interesting. When we look at average flock size, will you advance the animation? Thank you. 68% of producers in the Western US own less than 100 sheep or goats. So again, very similar to what we saw in the overall. But when you look down in more of your large 1,000 head band type operations, the Western part of the US, and you can advance, Kelly, actually had the largest percentage of some of these I guess, band type operations where we're seeing more than 1,000 head. However, additionally, it was still about 70% of the Western region respondents indicated that their small ruminant operation was supplemental income. So we also looked at it based on how they identified their flock or herd, and pretty well distributed between the registered flock, show sheep and goats, and farm flock, with 10% being kind of that range flock and 2% being buying and finish, which again, with some of those large feedlots in Colorado, not surprising that they did make an appearance in the western part of the US. So then, as Kelly mentioned at the beginning, part of what we wanted to determine through this survey was how can we as Extension deliver the best programs for producers, whether that's how we disseminate that information to them, or what formats work best for our producers and do they prefer. So of course, we launched this during the pandemic. And so we had to find out both on a virtual platform and on an in-person platform what our producers preferred. And so what we found is that with those virtual programs, what our producers most commonly prefer is that single program that's less than or equal to 45 minutes. So 43% of respondents indicated that that's their preference. But when we look at in-person programming, it's actually that all-day session with multiple sessions that people prefer, which makes sense. If we're asking producers to come in person, that we're asking them to come and take a whole day rather than just a couple hours out of their day. So we also wanted to look at kind of time of day and day of week. 'Cause I feel like as we plan extension programs, some days, this is some of the most talked about comments is, okay, well, when do we want to do this program? When is it timely? But when can we get producers to come? And so these ones, again, they could select more than one option on these as well. But for the most part, producers are prefer programming that's in the winter. So that December through February, kind of that downtime. Most prefer programming in the morning. And then for day of the week, obviously, especially since a lot of our producers are identifying as supplemental income, they likely work off the ranch as well. So those weekends, especially Saturday, tend to be the preferred day of the week as well. So I think we've all tried to get more creative on how we promote our extension efforts and programs, and social media has been a huge tool for that. And so we wanted to just see if there's other ways that we can utilize, or I guess how our producers want to hear about our extension efforts. And so here the most common was email, an electronic newsletter. And we also had another option for this one where they could enter just an open-ended answer. And of course, social media was kind of the number one preference. And again, I forgot to allude to earlier, these programming preferences are from the overall results, not just the Western US. But for the most part, they've kind of followed the same trends. So our next steps, we want to keep analyzing some of this data. You know, we need to summarize some of those short answers and seeing the producers that took the time to actually type in short answers, what it is that they're really interested in. We have, you know, this survey was approximately 39, I think, questions. So we're just skimming the top of the iceberg with this summary today. So we still have lots of data to analyze. We also want to make sure that this survey gets out there and is information and publications that can be used by other extension specialists in some of their grant writing and extension efforts. Obviously, we'll be giving presentations like this one. It'll help us to develop some of our producer programs, both here in South Dakota and hopefully in all of the other states as well. And then it also has really opened the door to potential collaborations. Like Kelly said, we started, you know, just over a year ago, fresh out of college. And so we've gotten the opportunity now to network with so many other small ruminant specialists. And hopefully this needs assessment helps people kind of connect the dots and see who else they could collaborate with in the industry as well. And so with that, we wanted to open it up to questions and any potential discussion or things that you guys have for us.
Well, while they're putting their questions in, I just want to thank you guys. I think this information is awesome and very valuable to us in extension as we get to start planning more of these in-person workshops. It definitely helps us know our clientele a little better. And as the industry is kind of changing and growing with more of those new farmers, and they're kind of on the smaller scale, knowing what kind of programming they might be more interested in. So I think that's great.
Well, and I know we directed a lot of it at, you know, our extension specialists, but, you know, I'm seeing like Amy Hendrickson with Wyoming on here and things like that. And it's things that our industry groups can use as well as they start to put together, you know, their summer conferences and things like that. So we'd be more than happy to share that with some of our state sheep and goat associations also.
Jaylyn and Kelly and Heidi, I'll throw this question at you both while people are thinking what they'd like to ask. You know, one of the challenges we have in the sheep industry is these emerging changes are pretty rapid in their onset. So marketing challenges sometimes seem to, you know, at the beginning of the pandemic, that was a huge challenge, doing enterprise budgets. And then all of a sudden, prices began to go up and that problem slowly disappeared. So, I mean, based on some of these results, what are your thoughts on addressing some like real emerging issues in real time?
One thought that comes to mind as I summarized the open-ended comments about market and marketing, just using that as the example, it's both the variability and people's distance to live animal markets that really came out. We did have a fair amount of people with dairy as well as direct marketing. And so there could be a little bias in terms of having a few more what we would see in our state as specialty producers that way. That could have come out, but I think those marketing comments were all over the board. The enterprise budgets came, the low cost of expenses, the extensive references to feed costs and feed availability. I don't think those are necessarily something that's new. I think it's getting it to scale, getting enough real examples for the people to connect to what information's already out there. The LMIC's summary for the cost of production, I think taking that and making it more scale would also be beneficial.
Great, thank you. We have one question here that I guess is more on the research side. You know, thinking ahead some of these findings as you extrapolate these and make them even more broadly available, have you contemplated using any multivariate analyses to expand the conclusions of your work and maybe an outlet, a scholarly outlet for some of this peer-reviewed publication? Going to put in a pitch for the Sheep and Goat Research Journal.
Yeah, well, like Jalen said, we're kind of, I mean, this is tip of the iceberg. It was just kind of like, okay, we need to start summarizing the data. We have a lot of numbers to go through and stuff, but that's something that, yeah, I guess, on analyzing it, probably we'll reach out to some of our colleagues who are really good at doing this kind of survey analysis data, and just, you know, finding the best way possible to kind of analyze this and summarize it as we move forward. But this is just kind of preliminary of us just looking through it quickly, kind of what we found.
So we have another question that I think you might expand on. It says, in regards to the programming preferences, did you see any difference by size of operation?
So that's one of those, you know, future, as we start to analyze, that's one thing that we want to look at, is starting to kind of cross-reference some of those things. We haven't yet. Those are just overall what our programming preferences are. But we're hoping to start to break things down. We're still trying to decide exactly how to do that, but size of operation is one that we've talked about, because it'll be interesting to look at a lot of our other questions based on just the size of their operation, because we know that your small flock producers are making very different decisions than your large scale producers. So it will be in future analysis.
Natalie, I'll take that question specifically down as we pursue different analyses. So we look into that. Thank you.
Okay, I think we had a question, but I think we'll answer that one just in the question and answer box. And yeah, I think it'll be really interesting to use this information and extension to be able to help guide our programs and better serve our audience. Okay, we have one more that came in. There's just a They're just saying that they'd like to learn and experiment with different breed characteristics. So did you guys, in the survey, was there anything in there about different, breeds that were represented in the different areas of the US?
We didn't ask a specific breed question. How we broke it out was simply how we had there as far as what they called them. I did start to see a lot of reference to less traditional breeds in terms of the open-ended responses. Specifically, those got categorized into that genetic theme. St. Croix, some of the other fiber animals definitely were mentioned specifically, but we didn't break down anything by a specific breed question or demographics.
Okay, but was there anything broken down between meat, wool, and dairy, those type of things?
You guys flip back to that economic importance question. That would be the most applicable question to that point.
Great. And then we had a comment. Hopefully you guys can see this in the chat from Natalie Yuri. She's with the Sheep and Goat Specialist with the excuse me, the National Animal Health Monitoring System. She said they had a similar needs assessment. So that might be another person that we can connect with.
Yeah, thank you, Natalie. We'd be more than happy to work with you for sure.
Okay, well, I think if there's any other questions, we can pick those up at the end.